Alberta Premier Danielle Smith plans to challenge Ottawa's requirement to achieve a net zero electricity grid by 2035, invoking the Sovereignty Act just moments ago in the provincial legislature for the first time. What about this situation is last resort? It's draft regulations. Nothing will be final until the middle of next year. Your bureaucrats and the federal government's bureaucrats are still talking. Why are you pulling this lever now?
They're just simply ignoring the Supreme Court that came down and said that the federal government cannot use an area of their jurisdiction as a pretext to invade ours, and yet they continue to persist. So we know that the danger that we have in this province is that we need to build more baseload power. In this province, it comes from natural gas. We don't have any generators willing to step up with the uncertainty the federal government has created, and that's why we need to step in.
Our government is ready to continue making substantial investments in Alberta's electricity infrastructure with a cooperative partner, and our regulations are designed with many flexibilities to ensure they are realistic and accommodate Alberta's needs.
They are neither. I mean, when they're talking about having natural gas be abated 95% by 2035, that technology just simply doesn't exist. And if you talk to anybody who is an expert in carbon capture, we're at about 60% abatement, which is pretty good. We might be able to get to 80%, which is fantastic. But 95% at the current available technology isn't achievable. And yet the federal government is intending to use its criminal law power to terrify senior executives so that they don't end up putting forward projects in the first place. And it's worked.
Their accusation, though, Premier, with respect, is that you're actually being deliberately inflammatory and more political, particularly when you use the threat that you say they have of criminal prosecution or the imposition of criminal law.
The federal government is flouting the rule of law. They have now lost 2 court cases, and they've lost them because they continue to overreach in our jurisdiction. Then they make us go to court for years at great expense, while everything is frozen in the private sector, to try to get our rights back. And we're not going to do that. We can't afford to do that this time. I can't afford to wait 4 or 5 or 10 years for the Supreme Court to ultimately come down on our side, as I believe they will. The federal government has to stop acting in a lawless way.
With great respect, Premier, the other way to look at it is, though, that they, along with the U.S. and other G7 countries, all of whom have set the same target, are trying to mitigate the impacts of climate change. Take your points about why it's going to be difficult for Alberta, but the goal with which they're approaching this with is to mitigate the impacts of climate change, which also end up costing Albertans a lot.
The kind of proposals that they're putting forward are a recipe for unaffordable energy, unreliable power grid, which will only chase investment away. And I just simply can't allow that. We are just defending Albertans. I think they should stop being provocative, stop acting in a lawless way, respect the law, respect the Constitution, respect the Supreme Court. And then we won't have to have this kind of uncomfortable conversation. I think we can work with them on developing a framework for small modular nuclear. We can develop a framework around hydrogen. And I think we can develop a framework around carbon capture. But we are not going to be bullied into giving up our jurisdiction. They have no right to be dictating to us, and we would ask for them to continue to work cooperatively with us, because I think we can.
Just finally, Premier, though, if I recall, it's the person who, your predecessor, former Premier Kenney, who actually said your crafting and now use, I would imagine, of the Sovereignty Act in and of itself threatens to make investment from Alberta flee. I believe he said, we'll ignore the Constitution, we'll choose which laws we enforce. Well, what investor in their right mind would put money at risk in Alberta?
We have to remember that what has happened here is the federal government's invading our jurisdiction, creating uncertainty, has caused investment to flee. I have no projects lined up to build baseload power of natural gas. And it's because of the uncertainty the federal government has created. We're about to restore certainty. We're telling the industry, we want to work with you to build more baseload natural gas. Tell us how we can do it, because we want to make sure that we continue to keep up with growth. So I think we're going to actually improve the investment climate in our province.